I'm Sorrel, youngest of five, 34, and the only one in the family who didn't follow the map laid out for us like a blueprint. Go to college, marry well, stay quiet, and make the family look good. I tried, God knows I tried. But after 2 years in business school, I dropped out, not because I couldn't handle it, but because I couldn't handle them, my family breathing down my neck, shaping my every move until I didn't recognize who I was becoming. I work 2 jobs now, bartending at night and doing freelance admin during the day. It pays the rent. Barely. And it keeps me moving. That's important, because stillness, in my world, invites judgment. My father Orson, once a respected oil exec, now spends his retirement micromanaging his children's lives like a Fortune 500. My mother Darla, quiet but not unaware, watches from the sidelines. She plays her part. My siblings, they've all found their golden lanes. Lawyers, consultants, realtors, married to surgeons. I always feel like I'm being tolerated more than loved. At family events, they seat me at the far end of the table, half out of frame in the photos. This time was no different. It was my nephew's college graduation dinner at Covington's, an upscale place in Houston's suburbs. Everyone was there, dressed like they were attending a gala. And me? I wore my best secondhand dress, pressed twice over to hide its history. The menu had everyone's names at the top, except mine. Sometimes the people closest to you build the highest walls. I'd read that once in a beat-up paperback someone left on the bus. Never forgot it. The dining room glowed gold from low chandeliers, cutlery aligned like soldiers. Servers glided by with wine and practiced smiles. The air smelled of aged steak and secrets. Orson took the floor, of course, raised his glass and toasted my brother, Darren, Harvard grad, 6-figure job, just bought a house in the Heights. The room clapped, cameras flashed. I smiled politely, my cheeks stiff. No one mentioned me. Darla leaned toward me and slipped something into my lap beneath the tablecloth. A gray silk scarf, my name, Sorrel, embroidered in soft silver thread. It felt like a lifeline. She didn't say a word, just sipped her wine. I wanted to believe this dinner would be different, that maybe, finally, I'd be acknowledged. I kept my eyes forward, clutching the scarf. Mom always said silence can be survival. Glasses clinked, forks scraped, laughter floated around like music I couldn't dance to. Orson didn't look my way once, until he did. That glance, sharp, measuring, like I was a crack in the wall he hadn't noticed until now. Then it came. In front of family, old friends, and 2 of his retired colleagues, he lifted his glass again. "And let's not forget Sorrel," he said. My chest swelled, until he added, "Our little dropout, who couldn't quite finish anything she started." He chuckled. No one else did. Just a few nervous laughs. Then silence. I sat frozen. The scarf in my hands trembled. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste metal. My siblings looked down, busying themselves with their water glasses, napkins, anything but eye contact. This is the price of staying quiet all these years. Family reputations in Texas, someone once told me, can be a gilded cage, pretty from the outside, suffocating within. I knew that cage better than anyone, but Orson wasn't done. "I think it's time we let Sorrel stand on her own 2 feet. No more allowances. She wants independence? Let's give it to her." Just like that, no warning. My small monthly stipend, barely enough to cover groceries, gone. As if it was charity, as if I hadn't earned a single ounce of support. I couldn't breathe. But I didn't cry. Not in front of them. Have you ever been punished just for not fitting their picture? I wanted to shout that to the ceiling. But instead, I sat still. Let the burn settle in my gut. Let it shift into something else, not just humiliation, something hot and quiet, like the first spark in a long-dried field. He thought he'd cut me down. Maybe he did. But in that same breath, he cut me loose. I stood without a word, slid the scarf into my purse, walked toward the door without meeting a single pair of eyes, except hers, Darla. She gave me a look, barely a nod, but it said more than anything spoken. Outside, the spring air wrapped around me, thick and sticky. The parking lot was nearly empty, a place for reflections, for decisions. They think they've written me out. They've only turned the page. Just then, my phone buzzed. A new message. No name. just a number I didn't recognize. The preview lit up under the streetlight. You need to see this. Tonight. I woke up in yesterday's clothes. The scarf Mom gave me, folded neatly on the nightstand, looked more like a flag left on a battlefield than a gift. My mouth was dry, not from crying. I hadn't shed a single tear. Not yet. Something inside me felt scorched, like the flame had gone out, but the coals were still hot, waiting. I sat up slowly, rubbed my temples. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge. The muted TV flashed images of morning traffic and political scandals I couldn't care less about. A stack of unpaid bills rested on the kitchen counter, accusing me from across the room. The note from my landlord, fading ink, folded 3 times, said rent was due by the 5th. It was the 7th. After the storm, you can see who built a shelter and who built a show. That line came to me from a documentary I'd watched months ago. I didn't know why it popped up now, but it hit different. I made a list in my head. People I could maybe lean on, not family. They'd made their stance clear. A former co-worker, maybe. A girl I used to tutor who now worked in IT. Loose threads, but maybe something to tug on later. I needed to act. First thing, check the bank. I hadn't looked since the dinner, too wrapped up in pride. But pride doesn't pay rent. I pulled up the app. The screen loaded slowly. Balance, 3,017. No surprise there. Then I tapped into the trust account my grandmother had set up before she passed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Or it was supposed to be. Error. Account not found. I tried again. Same message. I called the bank. After 5 minutes of robotic prompts, a real person came on. Polite, apologetic. Yes, ma'am. I see here that the trustee modified the access permissions 6 weeks ago. It appears the primary oversight was shifted. To who? I asked, though I already knew. Mr. Orson Langford. Of course. He hadn't just humiliated me in public. He'd gone behind my back and locked me out of the only thing my grandmother left me. This wasn't about making me grow up. This was about making me disappear. They weren't just cutting me off, they were cutting me out. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, phone face down. I stared at the scarf again, but it didn't comfort me. It stung. All the little slights over the years began lining up like dominoes. My ideas dismissed. My calls ignored. My name erased piece by piece. I left the apartment to get air. I needed coffee, clarity, something. The coffee shop on Grant and Bering had a booth in the back where I sometimes went to work on resumes or just breathe. As I waited for my order, I overheard 2 women at the next table chatting about my brother Darren's new startup, some family-funded consulting agency pitching innovation to oil companies. One of them mentioned an idea. It was mine. Word for word. A proposal I'd once drafted and emailed to Darren, back when I was desperate to be seen. He'd used it, claimed it, built a business with it. They took my silence as consent. I stirred my coffee too hard. It spilled over the edge. I didn't flinch. Sometimes family doesn't just break your heart. They steal your work and call it love. I rushed home, found the old laptop I hadn't touched in months, dusted it off, plugged it in. It wheezed to life. There it was, the original draft, the email, the timestamp. I printed them, one by one, slid them into a manila folder I labeled Truth. This wasn't just pain anymore. It was evidence. Still, it wasn't about revenge. Not yet. I needed something that reminded me I was more than the scars they left. That evening, I walked to the local shelter where I sometimes volunteered. Helped organize clothing donations, folded baby onesies and winter jackets with holes in the sleeves. The work grounded me. One of the older volunteers said, "You've got sharp eyes, girl. You see what others don't." I smiled, but it felt different now. Don't get mad, get even, but do it smart. I walked home slowly. The sun dipped low. My breath came steady. Back at my apartment, I sat down and opened the message I hadn't touched since the parking lot. The number was still unfamiliar, no name. The message read, "I know what they did. I can prove it." Attached was a photo, blurry but clear enough, my father. A man I didn't recognize, a contract, I felt my pulse thud behind my eyes. Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. I typed, "Who are you?" Paused. My thumb hovered over the send button. Was this a trap? Or the key? I stared at the blinking file icon on my screen. The email from the unknown contact was still open. My thumb hadn't moved since last night. I'd slept on the couch, laptop half closed on my stomach, afraid to lose the thread. The scarf was still there too, folded over the armrest like a sentry on watch. I finally opened a new browser tab, created a burner email address, and wrote back, "Received. Why now?" The reply came fast. Just 4 words. "You'll need this first." A screenshot attached, a date, a subject line. Internship. Sorrel Langford. It hit me like a whisper I'd ignored for years. I remembered that email chain, sort of. Orson had used our old family computer back then, and I, trying to be useful, used to back everything up just in case something broke. That was before I realized what was already broken. I rummaged through a box in my hall closet. Old receipts, dead remotes, a cracked phone charger, and, finally, the external drive I thought I'd lost. It clicked into the laptop like it had been waiting. Funny how the truth hides in plain sight until you're ready to see it. The folders were there, untouched, labeled by year, internship, emails. I scrolled until I found it. The name of the company, my name, Orson's name. Click. There it was, sent from his work email to his then supervisor. Subject, concerns, Sorrel Langford. My heart thudded as I read it. I must raise a flag regarding Sorrel's involvement in the ongoing projects. There have been lapses in judgment, questionable appropriation of company concepts, and increasing evidence of emotional instability. I would advise against offering her further opportunities. Our internal liability cannot withstand another mistake. No warmth, no grace. It wasn't even written like a father. Just a man in power, throwing someone under the bus to keep the ride smooth. It explained everything. Why the internship fell through. Why no one called back. Why even the professors stopped replying. He didn't just close the door on me. He nailed it shut and painted over it like I'd never stood there. I closed the file, then opened another window. My old college email archive. I hadn't touched it in years, but it still worked. Password reset, 2-factor code. And there it was, a message from the university's internship office from the same week. Unfortunately, due to concerns brought to our attention by your sponsor, we will be withdrawing support. It was the same language, the same tone. Cold, legal, impersonal. I leaned back in my chair, fingers numb. All those years I blamed myself, thought I hadn't tried hard enough, wasn't smart enough. Turns out, I never had a chance. I wasn't pushed. I was erased. The memory hit me hard. Sitting outside the dean's office that day, holding a folder with my resume and portfolio, waiting to plead my case. They didn't even look at me when they said it was over. Told me to take time for my mental health. They had already read the script Orson wrote. I snapped out of it and went to the printer. One by one, I printed everything. The email from Orson, the internship withdrawal, the old screenshots from job apps that mirrored the same slander. I laid them out across the floor and began sorting them like evidence at a crime scene. I grabbed 3 manila folders and labeled them with a black Sharpie. Lies, witnesses, patterns. It wasn't neat. My handwriting shook a little, but it was clear. This wasn't paranoia. This was a system, built to make sure I never got out of the hole. And I almost believed it worked. I pulled out an old contact book. There was one name I hesitated over, Professor Dana Kelso. She'd mentored me in my second year before suddenly distancing herself. I used to think it was because I disappointed her, but maybe she wasn't given a choice. She might still remember me, still believe in me. I wrote her name down next to the folder marked Witnesses. The pain was real. It sat right behind my ribcage like a stone. But under it, something stronger. Focus. Like putting broken glass together, not to repair it, but to make a weapon. I took the papers, all of them, and placed them into a folder that used to belong to my mother. It still had her initials in cursive on the inside flap. She gave it to me when I started college, said it would keep me organized. I believed her then. I believed a lot of things. That folder used to carry hope. Now, it carried proof. I sat back down, laptop open again, pulse steadier than it had been all week. A thought crossed my mind. This file, this story, it might not just stay between us. I was already imagining who might need to see it. Orson's company, a lawyer, a journalist. People needed to know what he was capable of. Then, just as I was closing the folder, my inbox pinged. Another email. Same anonymous sender. This one had a video file attached. Just the word, watch. I stared at the blinking play icon. Not tonight. Or maybe, right now. I hovered over it, finger trembling again, not with fear this time, but the weight of what came next. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a mess that finally made sense. Pages covered in highlighted printouts, sticky notes, old emails, all connected now. Every sentence Orson ever fed into the system, into my school, into work circles, into conversations I never heard, was right there in black and white. Same phrases, different years. Emotionally volatile. Doesn't handle pressure well. Better to keep her distant from anything sensitive. It wasn't a slip. It was a campaign. They didn't just lie about me. They built a lie machine, and I was the product they shelved. I clicked into the document metadata. Most people ignore that stuff, but timestamps don't lie. One draft after another, edited late at night, always from the same user. I recognized the login name, one of my father's old assistants. I had my proof. Now it was time to connect it to the real damage. I dug into a stack of manila folders, flipping through until I found my old dismissal letter from the university. The wording had always felt off, too formal, too final for a school that once gave me awards. I compared it with an internal memo from a source I'd printed yesterday, one that mentioned concerns expressed by parent and sponsor about students' reliability. My throat tightened. There it was. They didn't believe I was incapable. They made me incapable. They forged the cracks I spent years trying to patch. I remembered staring at my GPA, wondering how it dropped so fast when I barely missed an assignment. Orson told me I must have forgotten a few deadlines. Said it like I was losing my grip. He wasn't guessing. He was laying bricks over the exit, and I kept blaming myself. But not anymore. I gathered the matched memos, circled sections in red pen, and started outlining what I'd need if I ever brought this to light. Emails, letters, login logs, printed. Backed up, duplicated on a flash drive. Halfway through labeling a folder, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. Just a file this time. You'll regret forgetting her. MP4. I hesitated, then hit play. The video opened mid-sentence. A dark paneled room, a cluster of men in suits with wine glasses. The audio was crackly but clear enough. Should have cut her off sooner, Orson said, chuckling. You raise them, you pay for their ideas, and they still turn out defective. Someone off-screen laughed. What about that startup idea she pitched? Any movement? He waved a hand. It's mine now. She never brought returns. I dropped the girl. The girl. Me. Not a daughter, not a person, just a project he canceled. I didn't breathe for a full minute. Who filmed this? Who sent it? The angle was low, like a phone camera peeking out of a jacket pocket, which meant someone in that room knew the truth and didn't agree with it. I hit pause and just stared. They thought the cameras were off, I whispered, but the tape always runs. Something shifted inside me. No more reacting, no more explaining. They wanted silence. I'd give them visibility. I shut every open tab on my screen, pulled out a flash drive, backed up the files, then another, uploaded to cloud storage, mailed one to a P.O. box I hadn't touched since college. I even considered contacting a local journalist I used to tutor. Smart guy, believed in facts, and for the first time, I believed in mine. They taught me silence, I muttered, echoing the thought from earlier. Now I teach them visibility. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I was about to throw open the curtains. I checked the time. 8:46 p.m., the parking lot meeting. My phone buzzed again. One line. Bring the scarf. The scarf. That same gray silk Mom gave me. The one they all pretended not to see. The only thing from that dinner that hadn't lied. I stared at it for a beat, then folded it carefully, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and grabbed the folder marked Truth. By the time I reached the stairwell, the city was already washed in shadows. A steady wind pushed the leaves around the curb as I stepped outside. My car was parked 2 blocks down. The streets were quiet, too quiet. When I reached the lot, a black SUV sat at the edge, engine humming, headlights off. My phone buzzed again. No name, just, "We're ready." I gripped the scarf tighter in my hand. Tonight, silence ends and truth begins. The invitation came on thick cream paper, slipped under my apartment door as if it belonged there. "Orson Langford requests the honor," it began, dressed up like a wedding invite, but it read like a dare. A business family mixer in Dallas, celebrating his new partnership. The kind of event where everyone shook hands and spoke in rehearsed compliments. I sat at my kitchen counter with the envelope open, the gray scarf coiled next to my coffee mug. Part of me wanted to tear it up. But another voice, the one that had been growing since Houston, whispered, "If they want a show, you bring the spotlight." I stood, grabbed my planner, and started writing down the questions I wanted answered. What would he do if I showed up? Who else might see me? The old me would have hidden. This version was dressing for the stage. "Sometimes the only way to reclaim your name is to say it out loud," I muttered, sliding the scarf into my purse. The next afternoon, Dallas was already glowing under the kind of sunset money can buy. I parked 2 blocks from the venue to steady myself. String lights stretched across the courtyard, catching on crystal glasses and polished name tags. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and old bourbon. People I hadn't seen in years brushed past me, colleagues of Orson, one-time mentors, each doing a polite double-take, then looking away. The sound of a jazz trio floated over the crowd. I watched couples laugh in small clusters and flashed back to the parties of my childhood. I was always on the fringe, clutching a soda while my siblings performed like show ponies. That memory burned but didn't sting. This time I wasn't here to shrink. A man brushed past me, nodding. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly, before melting into the crowd. I held his glance a second too long. A lion remembers every hunter's face, I thought, pulling myself taller. Then he appeared. Orson, flanked by 2 partners, glass in hand, wearing that same half-smile he used when telling me I'd misunderstood everything. He walked over slowly, like he was doing me a favor. "You came all the way here for what?" he asked, tilting his head. I kept my voice even. "I know what you sent. I've seen the file." For a fraction of a second, his eyes flickered. Then the smirk returned. "You don't have proof anyone credible will believe," he said, swirling his drink. His calm wasn't confidence. It was habit. He'd lived so long rewriting stories, he didn't know what it felt like to be caught. I realized then I wasn't afraid. I was studying him, the way you'd study a piece of machinery before you dismantle it. An hour later, he took the stage to thank his partners and announce the new deal. The room leaned in. Cameras went up. My moment had arrived. Not a grand speech, not a meltdown, just a crack in the surface. I stepped forward from the crowd, still in my seat but louder than before. "How much of your story," I asked, voice steady, "is built on someone else's silence?" Heads turned. Murmurs rose. I didn't name names, but the hints were heavy enough that a few guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Orson, then at me. He gave a dry chuckle into the microphone. "We're here to celebrate, not trade family grievances." But the seed was planted. In a room like this, seeds sprout fast. "The truth doesn't need an echo," I said softly. "It just needs a crack." I walked back, leaving him at the podium, my pulse steady. As the applause staggered on, someone brushed past me, slipping a folded note into my hand without breaking stride. "He's been hiding more than you think," it read. No signature, just that. I left the party without looking back, head high. He wanted me to beg. I came to reclaim. In the parking lot, as I reached my car, my phone buzzed, the same anonymous sender. "He's going to make the next move. Be ready." I slid into the driver's seat, the scarf in my lap, and started the engine. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't on the defense anymore. I was the one drawing the line now. I stepped into the conference room with the kind of calm that only comes after enough fire. The long table was polished like glass, surrounded by high-backed chairs and men in tailored suits who'd rehearsed their reactions long before I arrived. Orson sat at the far end, fingers laced like a judge. The lighting was low, deliberate, like they wanted shadows to do the talking. I didn't wait for permission. I laid the folder down in front of them. "You've built lies. I have the truth." My voice didn't shake. I made sure of that. I saw Orson blink slowly, then glance at the man to his right. No one reached for the folder yet. My heart was beating, but not like before. It wasn't panic, it was readiness. A different kind of silence filled the room, one that knew there was no turning back from this point. Then, slowly, I pulled out something smaller from my bag. A square gift box, lavender ribbon still crisp. I opened it in front of them. Inside, the silk scarf Darla gave me years ago. It had never been worn. Beneath it, her handwritten note, faded but intact. "This was erased," I said quietly. Orson had it removed from every display, every photo, every room in the house. I held it up. "But it still exists. Like me." His face barely moved, but the man next to him shifted uncomfortably. "You valued presentation," I continued. "Polished images, curated stories, but you forgot, what you throw out sometimes comes back in a box." They stayed silent. "You couldn't erase me," I said, folding the scarf back into the box, "because I never had to ask permission to exist." The door behind me opened. Reggie stepped in. I hadn't expected him. Not here, not tonight. "I remember her from day one," he said firmly, walking to the table. "Y'all acted like she was just background, but I saw her fix the AV board at that Christmas fundraiser without being asked, without taking credit. If she hadn't done it, the whole show would have crashed." The room froze. "And if you're all so interested in truth," Reggie added, looking at Orson, "start with what you left out." Orson stood. His smile was gone. "Reggie, we appreciate your sentiment, but your memory's convenient. You've always favored the underdog." "And you've always favored the mirror," Reggie shot back. Orson turned to me, posture hardening. "Let's not forget who disappeared halfway through her own internship, who left without a word, who made scenes when people didn't praise her enough." I didn't flinch. I opened the folder again, slid out the forged documents, the emails, the university letters. "You exaggerated my grades, doctored files, sent a letter that cost me my future. You didn't bury me. You built a stage." He narrowed his eyes. "What do you want? Apology? Money?" I shook my head. "I'm not here to defend. I'm here to expose." That was the first moment he looked rattled. His fingers tapped the edge of the table. "You think this makes you powerful?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "It makes me clear." The room was dead quiet. Even the AC hum seemed to stop. Then he leaned forward. "Who sent you the tape? Who's backing you?" I let the question hang. Their eyes searched my face like they'd missed something. "Let's let the record speak," I said, stepping back. "Tomorrow, all will see it." And with that, I walked out. Down the hallway, I could still feel their stares behind me, but I didn't turn around. I had the scarf in my hand, folded now like armor. My phone buzzed as I reached the stairwell. A text. "They've just begun. Are you ready?" I paused in the corridor's shadow, knowing this was only the beginning of their backlash, and mine. By the time I reached Orson's office again that night, my steps felt less like a visitor's and more like a reckoning. The building was slick with quiet power, glass walls that pretended to be transparent, but everything about this place was designed to hide. Security nodded me in. They knew who I was now. Orson had labeled me as noise, but noise can become signal if you play it loud enough. The office they placed me in was cold and expensive, chairs that screamed wealth but sat like stone. Walls you could see through, but nothing ever felt seen. Orson was late. I wasn't surprised. I opened my bag slowly, took out the scarf, the folder, and the USB. My ammunition laid out before me, calm like chess pieces, I wasn't scared anymore. I was focused. They brought me here thinking I'd beg, but I was done asking. I am no longer the girl who fades into the background, I thought. When Orson finally entered, he had two attorneys with him. One I recognized from a shareholder meeting years ago. They didn't shake my hand. He started with pleasantries, false concern. We're hoping this meeting can clear the air. I slid the notebook across the table. You don't clear air by spraying perfume. You open a window. They glanced at each other. Inside the notebook were original drafts from college, pages I wrote in frustration and hope, design sketches, notes, passages of things I'd whispered to myself at night to not give up. I flipped to one. Read aloud. If silence is my punishment, then I will speak until I'm free. Something shifted. One of the attorneys adjusted his collar. The woman on Orson's left actually leaned forward. These aren't just notes, I said. This is my voice, from before the erasure. I looked up at Orson. You cannot erase a voice that's always been mine. He tried to wave it off. Old notebooks don't prove anything. They're emotional souvenirs. I reached back into the folder. This does. It was a scanned, notarized copy of a legal clause from a corporate trust document. My grandmother's signature. Dated, stamped, real. It named me, not just as a relative, but as the intended recipient of a dormant stake, a hidden clause meant to mature only under certain triggers they tried to make sure never came. This isn't just a clause, I said. It's proof that even when you tried to erase me, someone saw me. And she made it law. Orson stood up so fast the chair skidded. This is ridiculous, he barked. You think you can waltz in here with old journals and some dusty page and take what you didn't earn? I stayed seated. I didn't waltz. I climbed. He signaled to security. She's trespassing now. This is private business. I didn't move. This isn't just private. It's systemic. You think families are built on silence, but yours is built on fear. You don't know what you're talking about, he growled. I stood slowly. I know this. When you hide the truth long enough, it becomes your downfall. He looked tired then. Really tired. Not angry, just unsure. The man who had all the answers was now afraid of one woman holding a scarf and a document. That's when the door opened. Baron walked in. Everything paused. He didn't look at Orson. He looked straight at me. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. I knew that look. He was weighing years, between loyalty and truth, between silence and blood. My throat tightened. Baron's eyes met mine, and for one heartbeat, I thought he'd say the words I've waited years to hear. I arrived early, not to rehearse, not to overthink, just to breathe. The auditorium was grander than I remembered. Wide arc of seats, a stage built for giants, and rows of blinking lights from news crews already positioning themselves. I sat near the edge of the backstage curtain, watching as people filtered in. Executives, investors, local officials. Some of them I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, too quiet to matter, too present to ignore. I ran my fingers along the edge of the folder in my lap, checked the USB drive one more time. The scarf rested in my pocket, folded like a contract of its own. Not sentimental, strategic. My heart didn't race like it used to. It thudded steady, low, like a drumbeat before a charge. I told myself one last time, if your life were riding on one speech, would you hide or stand in the light? When the lights dimmed and the host took the stage, the air shifted. Orson walked out with the confidence of someone who believed the narrative still belonged to him. He opened with a polished line, hands outstretched like a preacher. But then Baron stood, no fanfare, just stood, and spoke into the mic before Orson could stop him. I'd like to introduce someone who helped shape the foundation of what we're honoring tonight. He didn't look at his father. He looked at me. She's been part of this story longer than most of us, Sorrel. Gasps were audible. A few people actually turned in their seats. Orson froze, just long enough to show his mask had a crack. Baron sat back down, didn't explain. He didn't have to. That single sentence shifted the weight of the room. I stood, walked forward, didn't rush, took the stage like I belonged there, because I did. Some of you know my name, most of you don't. That was by design. I looked toward the front row where Orson sat, stiff. But silence is a decision. And mine's over. I plugged in the USB. The projector lit up. Emails, handwritten notes, design blueprints signed under different names, but written in my handwriting. Legal documents, quotes traced back to stolen speeches, slide after slide. Orson stood halfway through. This isn't what he started. I clicked next. Security moved. I didn't flinch. Neither did Baron. This, I said, pointing at a clause on the screen, is a contract written by someone who's no longer alive to speak, but her ink hasn't faded. It names me as rightful holder of— "Stop this now!" Orson shouted. But the room was no longer his. The cameras caught everything. The whispers grew into gasps. Some board members leaned toward each other. Some sat back like they'd just seen a ghost. I took a breath, unfolded the scarf, laid it gently on the lectern. Then, from inside the fabric, I drew a single check. Not torn, not forged, not dated yesterday. Signed and notarized by my grandmother. And her handwriting, her seal. I held it up. "This is not a gift," I said, voice steady. "It is what was always mine." I placed the check beside the scarf. There was no applause at first, just silence thick enough to carve. Then a ripple of claps, some hesitant, some fierce. I didn't smile, I didn't bow. I just looked at Orson. His face was pale, twisted between disbelief and rage. But it was the fear I focused on, the kind that creeps in when a man realizes the lie he built no longer holds. I stepped back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One line. "They're retaliating tonight." I didn't react. Not yet. But as I looked out over that crowd, the ones still watching, still recording, still whispering, I felt something different. I wasn't done. Tonight, the war begins in shadows, and I will not be silenced again. The house sat low by the lake, a single-story frame with pale blue siding and a porch wide enough for 2 chairs and a quiet morning. I had chosen it myself. No family name on the deed, no ghosts in the closets, just water, light, and a dock that creaked when the breeze rolled in. For the first time in years, silence wasn't a weapon. It was a shelter. I'd wake early, make coffee in a chipped mug, sit by the window, and watch the mist lift off the water. My journal lay open, not for evidence anymore, but for reflection. Scratches of thoughts, hopes, plans. Where storms once lived, sunlight now rested. And as I wrote one morning, I remembered a line someone told me long ago. "Some bridges are meant to be burned. They light the way forward." The world outside didn't stay still. News clips ran for days after Dallas, my voice echoing on TV, Orson's face blurred in headlines. Calls came from reporters, old acquaintances, even cousins I hadn't heard from in decades. I took none of them. Orson's downfall was his own doing, and I wouldn't give it more of my breath. My energy turned inward, to the work of putting myself back together. Healing, but not erasing. Gratitude sat beside the scars. I understood now what it cost to grow thorns. "You don't grow thorns without bleeding first," I whispered once as I watched the sunlight scatter on the lake. People started finding me, not the old family, but strangers who'd watched the broadcast and recognized their own silencing. One woman drove from San Antonio, walked up my path, and hugged me without asking. "You spoke for all of us," she said into my shoulder, then left before I could answer. A letter arrived from my stepmother a week later, handwritten, small olive branch in blue ink. She said she'd kept my drawings all these years. I placed the letter on a shelf above my desk. Not ready to answer, not throwing it away either. Boundaries could be love too, if you held them steady. Forgiveness didn't erase. It built walls in the right places. I began something new. Small at first. A mentorship program for young women cut out of their own families, scholarships for those told they didn't belong. A girl named Lila was my first mentee. 16, bright, already burned once by people who should have protected her. When she sat across from me, eyes full of fight and doubt, I recognized myself. "Your voice is yours," I told her. "Don't let them rewrite it." This was the legacy I wanted, something that didn't vanish when the cameras stopped rolling. Evenings were mine again. I'd walk the lakeside trail as the sun dipped low, air turning copper. Each step felt like a closing bracket around a sentence I'd been writing for years. "This peace was earned," I said under my breath. "Not gifted." Sometimes memories rose, childhood scenes, moments I'd once seen only through pain. They no longer burned. They just existed, balanced. On the last walk of summer, I paused at the end of the dock. The sky was bruised purple, water dark and still. I closed my eyes and let one final thought surface. I wasn't born broken. I was born strong. It just took time to remember. I turned back toward the house. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. I answered without thinking, and froze.